Part 13. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 124. Probably because of the pill given by the old man, Subai's aura now became more continuous and ordinary, so when he wanted to deliberately hide his aura, it was much easier than before. Under the premise of maintaining a certain distance, Subai was confident that the monk and Gyatso could not detect him. However, to be on the safer side, Subai waited for 3 hours before starting to climb again. The last time, when he was about to reach the top of the mountain, Subai was finally persuaded by the old woman several times. He thought that the main mission too was released to the entire audience, and even if he didn't take the first shot, someone else would follow and climb up. Sensational. So he was happy to wait and let the fat guys who came after them go and fend for themselves. When Subai started to go up the mountain, he looked up and saw a very faint firelight like a firefly. This should belong to Fatty and the others. Looking at the firelight and visually measuring the distance, Subai frowned slightly and continued at the normal speed. To put it bluntly, with the physiques of Fatty and the three of them, it would be impossible for them to reach just halfway up the mountain in 3 hours. Could it be that I encountered some trouble or something happened? Because of the distance, Subai couldn't really know what happened. Subai even thought about whether the old woman appeared again, but it was impossible to think about it. The Buddhist aura on Gyatso and the monk was a natural restraint for the old woman. The old woman could not be so ignorant. At the same time, if she wanted to, it would be uneconomical to bet on many people. For example, if Subai knew that the old woman had done the same thing to Fatty and the others that happened to her, then at least for Subai, he would be grateful for her little bit. Will definitely disappear in an instant. In view of the above speed, Subai had to slow down his speed and maintain the necessary safety distance. Subai did not want to meet the monks and the others now, and there was no need to meet. Since a team relies on interest relationships as a bond, it is indeed a bit boring to maintain a dynamic state of stabbing each other for interests at all times. Moreover, Subai's previous actions were not suitable for him to join this team now. Finally, in the middle of the night, Subai saw the ball of light rising up the mountain. Subai also subconsciously speeded up, but at the same time, Subai suddenly sensed an unusual smell. At this time, he happened to be beside the pavilion, halfway up the mountain, but he did not stop, but continued on. Go up. After walking some distance, Subai stopped walking and stood still. I'm just telling you, how could it be possible that in the end of the spoof story world only a few of the people we know are left, and it's impossible for all the other babies who we don't know to die? Subai seemed to be talking to himself, but it was obvious that he meant something. A dark figure walked out from the woods on one side. It was a graceful figure, obviously a woman. There is a bracelet on the woman's wrist, which seems to be shining even in the dark. Why don't you leave? The female voice was clear. The mantis stalks the cicada while the oriole follows, which is always a very unpleasant thing. Subai said honestly. Obviously, he deliberately slowed down the process and let Fatty and the three of them go ahead to fight the thunder. But now there is actually someone behind him, which makes Subai feel that his sense of accomplishment is too low. For this kind of thing, everyone in the front is charging for themselves, and only when you come out in the end and pick the biggest fruits can you feel the real pleasure. I discovered you a long time ago, the woman said. I followed you up that day, but you never came back. I admit, your concealment skills are indeed very powerful. Are you strengthening the assassin? Subai shrugged. Actually, I am very curious. Just now, why did you suddenly release your murderous intention towards me? If you didn't treat me right, release the murderous intent, and I believe I will not discover your existence, and you can continue to hide in a corner near me. My jade bead sensed a dangerous aura. I'm sorry. It's my negligence, or I haven't mastered my mind cultivation skills yet. The woman was also very honest. What now? Should we go up together or fight to the death here? Subai asked. Let's go up together. It's not worth fighting to the death here. The woman made her choice. Subai didn't move, still standing on the road looking at the woman. After the two sides were in a stalemate for almost 5 minutes, the woman finally spoke unexpectedly. Do you want to live and die? Obviously, Subai's move can only be understood as this. Subai licked his lips, smiled, and then made a gesture of invitation, waiting for the woman to come forward. I don't know why, but the woman didn't dare to step forward because of the silence for the previous 5 minutes. What? Subai asked. The woman took a deep breath, walked forward, and stood in front of Subai. They've already gone up, let's hurry up. Subai and the woman began to speed up together. Half an hour later, the stone tablet with Fulong Temple written on it appeared in front of them. Subai returned here last time and did not continue going up. The woman stopped, squatted down in front of the stone tablet, then took out something like a rubbing from her arms and pasted it on the words on the stone tablet. Can I borrow your blood? The woman asked. Subai shook his head. It's not convenient to take out my blood. The woman nodded. She finally understood Subai's explanation. It was not that the other party was reluctant, but that the other party's physique and bloodline were really inconvenient. Her finger scratched her palm, and the woman soaked the rubbing with her own blood. After a while, the rubbing was taken off. On the rubbing covered with blood, there was no word Fulong Temple, only one. Die. Interesting. Subai looked at the writing on it and said. The woman nodded. It's indeed interesting. I didn't dare to stay long after you turned back here last time, but I also noticed this stone monument. This stone monument is very unusual. The front may not be the top of the mountain. Subai crossed his hands on his chest, as if thinking, what could that be? A barrier. It's very likely that it's a barrier. If this is a Taoist law field, it would be normal to set up a barrier here, Subai said. Whose Taoist law field will have the word death written on the boundary monument? It's okay to play something non-mainstream on a whim, Subai explained. The woman stared at Subai. Do you know something? It seems that you did not follow me from the beginning, but you should have followed me after I entered this town. The woman nodded, indicating that Subai was right. That's good. I won't say any more. If you're scared, you don't have to go up. I'll go up first. Subai climbed up the stairs and past the stone monument. Then the road ahead became much smoother. After walking for another 5 minutes, a Taoist temple appeared in Subai's sight. The Taoist temple was very short, so short that Subai felt it's extremely inappropriate to appear here. It doesn't match the specifications of such famous mountains and rivers. It looks like an ordinary mud house, and it doesn't look at all like a cultivator's law field. The woman chased after her and walked behind Subai. She was very good at hiding, but Subai was not afraid of her. Once she chose to attack him, Subai had the confidence to withstand her and even kill her. After all, whether they are vampires or zombies, assassins dislike them because they are difficult to kill with one hit. A little disappointed, Subai looked at it as he walked. If it weren't for the gossip and various Taoist-related things in front of every house, Subai would have thought he was in an ordinary mountain village, especially when there was a hanging in front of each house. String corn on the cob. Continuing walking inside, Subai saw several graves, some old and some new. As he got closer, Subai stopped in front of a tomb without any words. This tomb is so new. It's really new, the woman agreed. I said, can't you take off the veil? Subai said impatiently. The woman was dressed in black. Subai understood that she made a choice for her career, but even her face was not covered with tears. It's a bit boring if you don't want to show it. Do you really want to see it? You are ugly. Not too ugly. Forget it, I'm not interested, Subai refused. Next, Subai focused his attention on the new tomb in front of him. This tomb was so new that it really looked like it had been repaired yesterday. The soil on the ground still had a moist feeling that had not evaporated completely. Subai took out Bapi and dug directly. He wanted to see who was in this new tomb. Bapi was extremely sharp, and it was indeed a waste of resources for Subai to use it to dig graves, but the effect was indeed surprisingly high. Soon, a grave that was not deep was almost dug up by Subai. There is a very ordinary coffin inside. It is not very expensive. It seems to be carved from the wood that can be seen everywhere on the mountain. The style is very simple. In fact, a coffin has many attention points and details, but this coffin has no details at all. It appears to have been deliberately omitted. Subai patted the dust in his hands and said to the woman behind him, "Come and help me. I'm here and you are on the other side. Let's lift the lid of the coffin. Isn't this good? Open the coffin in this place." The woman seemed hesitant. Subai laughed angrily, "Why do you care about this now?" The woman nodded and stood opposite Subai. The two of them grabbed one end of the coffin with their hands. Subai had observed before that there were no nails, so they quickly opened the lid of the coffin. A female corpse was exposed inside. The female corpse was covered in black clothes and her face was covered with a black gauze. "It really looks like you," Subai teased. When Subai saw the bright bracelets on the wrists of the female corpse, his eyes suddenly froze. The woman nodded, "It's indeed very similar. You really made me work in vain yesterday. I just dug a hole for myself yesterday and buried it. You dug me out today." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 125. Hearing this, Subai was not too surprised. The moment he opened the coffin and saw the body, he had roughly guessed this, but he still felt that something didn't make sense. Since the woman was dead according to what she said, okay, why bother with this? Death is like a lamp going out. The reason why she can maintain this state now should be because of the special area here. However, some of her performances made Subai a little confused about her purpose. It was just to follow her up the mountain and then scared yourself after opening the coffin? So, what you said before, that you secretly followed me up the mountain and followed me down the mountain yesterday, must be false. When I went up the mountain, you were actually already on the mountain, and then accompanied me down the mountain. Then accompany me up the mountain this time." The woman nodded and said nothing more. She didn't even have any other attitude. She just looked at her body silently. Because her face was covered with a veil, her expression or even her gaze could not be seen. It's all very vague, but you can feel her deep attachment and reluctance to her body, with a kind of sadness that even though they are face to face, they have to say goodbye forever. "Then what?" Subai was still squatting beside the coffin. "You are like this, which makes me a little confused. What Subai means is, what are you going to do next? Come up with an attitude. Are you going to take action against me and drag a scapegoat to die with me, or something else? Make a statement quickly, so that everyone can enter the next stage. It's okay to fight, kill, talk or debate, just come up with a charter. You just looked at your own body and looked narcissistic." Subai really didn't know what to do. "I don't know what I should do. Logically speaking, if I die and you don't die, should I let you die together and stay with me? Otherwise, I will be too lonely." Subai nodded, "If I were you, I would probably let all the listeners who come here die here with me, and I won't let anyone go." This is indeed Subai's true thoughts. Think about it, if I were to stay here alone without acknowledging my return, while the rest of the audience completed their tasks and returned to the real world, it would be simply a kind of torture for me to be hanging alone like this. This should be the case for most of the audience, and even it is a choice that most ordinary people would make. But I'm not you." The woman stood up and her body began to float. "I'm a little tired of it." Subai looked at the woman who kept floating. "I don't believe it." The woman smiled, "I don't believe it either, but I am indeed a little tired of it. Am I a ghost now? Is it a puppet? Is it a puppet? I don't even know what I am now. I only know that I once buried my own body with my own hands. This feeling is very bad. I am not interested in letting you all try it. It's boring. It's really boring. Sudbai rubbed his eyes. It sounds really touching. I feel proud that there is such a noble person like you in the audience. I originally thought that our group was all perverts, no, to think that a holy mother really appeared. When the woman heard this, she was silent for a long time, and finally sighed. However, whether I am willing to let you try this feeling will not affect the overall situation at all. Look, your tombstone has appeared. As the woman's voice fell, in front of Sudbai, a tombstone emerged from the soil, almost completely standing on the ground, almost half a person tall, an old-style tombstone. There is no word on the tombstone, but there is Sudbai's aura on the tombstone. Sudbai knew that this was his tombstone, a tombstone tailor-made for him. Interesting. Sudbai squatted down in front of his tombstone and reached out to touch it. Then, where is my body? Isn't it right behind you? The woman pointed behind Sudbai. When Sudbai heard this, he looked back and found that there was another version of himself standing behind him. That version of himself had closed his eyes and slowly fell to the ground, lying on the ground silently. You can bury you now, otherwise you will rot quickly. The woman's voice was a little sad. I previously rubbed the word death in front of the stone tablet on the mountain. My original intention was to wish you, when faced with difficulties, retreat. Sudbai shook his head. Don't flatter yourself. Your attitude is like a stripper who stripped naked and spread her thighs and shouted at a pervert. Don't come over and don't ruin my reputation. The woman was still floating in the sky, not reacting at all to Sudbai's teasing. Sudbai raised his head and looked at her. Can you stop floating around in the sky like a ghost? I am a ghost, the woman replied. So that's why you allowed me to follow me without any defense. There should be. Yes. Sudbai lowered his head and looked at his body intently. He reached out to his face and touched it. The woman floated in front of Sudbai and asked in a very calm voice, I'm curious, when you turned around and saw your own body, what were you thinking about? I was wondering if I should take advantage of the heat, Sudbai replied seriously. The woman's chest rose and fell. She was obviously shocked by Sudbai's answer. Her eyes looking at Sudbai became very strange. Sudbai clapped his hands, stood up, and continued walking inside without even looking at his body. Your body is rotting, the woman reminded. Yes, Sudbai's body had spots on his face, and some places had begun to rot. This feeling sat in Sudbai's heart, as if his body was still with him. This was a real empathy, a feeling that he was about to rot and collapse. It was so real and real. However, Sudbai continued to walk forward without looking back at his body, nor did he think about burying his body in his own tombstone. Sudbai continued to walk inside. The surrounding houses were no longer ordinary rooms, but an open area of about 100 square meters appeared, like a school ground. At the other end of the school ground, there were a slightly taller building. Perhaps, even in places where cultivators live, they are also divided into 3, 6, and 9 grades. Sudbai felt that the place he had walked before should be where the lowest monks lived. Their future and destiny may be, I just want to be a Taoist priest like Lin Zhenying after I come down from the mountain, catch the little ghosts, destroy the little demons, and at the same time advertise the Fulong Mountain Dojo. And those who have great perseverance and talent will probably continue to practice in the mountains, because the pursuits of these two people are completely different. Sudbai continued to move forward. When he reached the center of the school grounds, the rotten feeling in his body came over him again. It was like a drug addict, or an ordinary person facing a gun pointed at him. As before, a feeling that as his body rotted, he was about to die came over him, and he couldn't get rid of it. Sudbai lowered his head, let out a low growl. then gritted his teeth and continued walking forward. This is a very painful confrontation and a very difficult choice. It seems that there is a voice in the heart that is constantly persuading Subai. As long as he buries the body in the coffin, everything will be fine and there will be no pain. There will be no suffering and great liberation. But Subai is a person with a very unpredictable personality. People like this are often able to do things that surprise others around them. He really doesn't care, he doesn't care at all. The woman was floating behind Subai, and she was very puzzled by Subai's behavior. She had been there, so she could clearly understand how terrifying this feeling was, as if there were countless flesh maggots eating at her bones. It's like crawling at the bottom, which makes people want to stop. However, just after Subai walked through the school grounds, he suddenly felt that the feeling in his body had completely disappeared. Subai smiled and then turned around. The woman also subconsciously looked down. Below, Subai's body stopped rotting in an instant, and turned into dots of starlight, floating towards Subai. This. The woman's eyes were filled with shock, but soon, the shock turned into enlightenment, and finally, into annoyance. Look, it's not that simple whether you're dead or not. This should be a barrier, a very overbearing barrier. If you can't hold it back and bury your body in it, you'll really be dead and you'll be trapped forever. I am imprisoned here and become a puppet. If I can walk out directly, as long as I walk here, the effect of the barrier will disappear. In fact, there is no real death at all, just a very strange effect. Subai seemed to be unaware of the woman's angry expression and was talking to himself. As the starlight continued to integrate into his body, Subai felt as if his whole body had been cleansed and sublimated. This feeling was wonderful. First, there was the continuous pill given by the old man, and this time he came here for a physical sublimation. Although Subai did not see any obvious improvement in strength from the benefits obtained these 2 times, they were crucial to his future strengthening and use of power. It has an important impact and can be regarded as laying an excellent foundation. Why don't you die? Why can you walk over? Why should I bury my body? Why should I stay here forever? Why am I the one who is permanently imprisoned and you are not? This is not fair. This is not fair. The woman flew towards Subai like crazy, with a cold murderous intent. Subai reached out and touched the tip of his nose, and said calmly. Look, Holy Mother, bitch, you are the kind of person you are. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 126. The woman was already hysterical. Obviously, her previous indifference was really just an act, as Subai said before. That gesture, that indifferent attitude, those words that I don't want you to become neither human nor ghost together, Subai never believed it from the beginning. On the contrary, if Subai still believed this kind of nonsense, if so, it would really be like living on a dog for more than 20 years. The generosity created by hypocrisy, the freedom and ease created by fiction. In fact, it is so vulnerable. When you meet others who are better than you, when you meet others who are not as unlucky as you are, when you meet others who do better than you, your false skin is completely torn apart, and what emerges is hysteria, jealousy and various reluctances, and people who take off their makeup to reveal their true colors often look more like devils than people who were bad from the beginning in the ordinary sense. However, it has long been self-evident how much strength an assassin filled with hatred and negative emotions can still exert. For an assassin to rush over so openly and recklessly, Subai she seemed even more confident. The woman opposite was just a loser, and had nothing to be afraid of. A ball of black energy appeared in the woman's palm, condensing into a sword. Bapi was held across Subai's chest, ready to fight. Both sides. Closer. The woman's sword thrust straight at him, without any fancy or extraneous elements. She obviously wanted Subai to die. Subai used Bapi to block, but something happened that made Subai frown. The woman's sword passed directly through Bapi, like a wisp of black smoke with no specific shape. Faced with this change, Subai quickly retreated, but the sword was faster, and it still pierced his chest, and transformed into an entity in an instant. Subai let out a muffled groan. The woman let out a long roar of pleasure. Obviously, she was very happy to see Subai end up in the same fate as herself. Now that she was neither a human nor a ghost, she wanted Subai to become a ghost. However, the next moment, she was stunned. She saw Subai taking the initiative to move forward after letting out a muffled groan. Puff. The woman's sword pierced Subai's chest. Subai moved forward and let the sword penetrate his chest, as if he was actively facing the sword to die. However, an opportunity appeared between the lightning and flint. After further narrowing the distance, Bapi drew an icy arc under Subai's control. The woman tried to raise her head, but her lips twitched a few times and her head fell back. The headless body fell to the ground and began to burn. At the same time, in front of the woman's tombstone, a new her began to condense again. Subai held the dagger in his right hand, covered the wound on his chest with his left hand, and started sprinting. The location of this barrier was too weird. Subai could have taken this opportunity to leave directly. He didn't believe that the woman could really pursue her all the way inside. There must be a limit. However, it was not Subai's style to leave like this. Since the other party had taken action against her. Then, let's fight to the death. It takes time for a woman to regroup her body, and more importantly, she has never experienced this kind of being killed and reborn again. Subai took away her first time, so she seemed a little unfamiliar, which would delay much time. At this time, Subai, who was not sloppy at all, had already rushed to the woman's tombstone and squatted down beside the woman's coffin. The coffin lid was opened by the woman and Subai before, but it has not been closed yet. I don't know if this woman will regret pretending to be a big-tailed wolf before and dig out her coffin with Subai and lift the lid. When Subai reached for the woman's body, he turned his head to look at the expression on the woman's face who was reuniting her body. Subai enjoyed this feeling very much. When she saw fear and instinctive panic from the woman's expression, Subai smiled with satisfaction. Then, while smiling, she grabbed the neck of the woman's body in the coffin with both hands and twisted it. Crack. Continuous crisp sounds were heard, and the woman's head was actually twisted off by Subai in this simple and crude way. When exerting his strength, Subai even briefly entered the zombie state to increase his strength, but it was just fleeting. Here, Subai did not dare to be too blatant. This was why he had not directly used the zombie state before. Same with attacks against women. It's not that Subai is too big, but he is worried that he will be too public and trigger something here. After all, this is still a Taoist law ground in name, although now it seems that it is less and less like a Taoist law ground. Feel. The woman who was reshaping her body let out a scream. Then it started to fall apart. At last, the smoke disappeared. Subai held the woman's head in her hand. She did not throw it away directly, but took the time to lift the veil that covered the woman's face. After looking at the woman's true appearance, Subai shook his head, threw his head on the ground, and left a sentence. How ugly. However, Subai took the bracelet on the woman's corpse and put it on him. It was considered a trophy. Subai had only saved story points to exchange for the expensive Hellfire shotgun. Bai still stole it from the fox. Now, Subai is really willing to accept this kind of weapon. He was indeed a bit too bachelor before. After passing the school grounds and walking further in, Subai saw a mountain road. However, this mountain road was not as rough and simple as the road up the mountain. It was obviously carefully carved. Subai wanted to know how Fatty and the others lived when they passed by the tombstone. Although they were walking in front of him, he had brought the woman down the mountain yesterday, and she was brought up again by him today, which was equivalent to Subai giving the woman in front of him. Fatty and the others acted as a wingman, which helped relieve Fatty and the others' burden to a certain extent. However, it is conceivable that he can see the clues, and it should not be difficult for the monk and Gyatso, the two eminent monks. The mountain path was carefully polished and piled up with a material similar to granite. It looked very fine. Subai continued to walk deeper along the mountain path. Not long after, a lotus pond appeared in front of him. The lotus flowers in the lotus pond are blooming, looking very beautiful and bringing a feeling of vitality. However, when Subai got closer, he found a pool of blood under the lotus pond. Subai didn't know who the bloodstains belonged to, but it was probably from Fatty and the others, which meant that they had encountered danger here, and some of them had even been injured. I don't know if the dangerous thing has been solved by them. Subai walked forward more and more carefully. There were cliffs on both sides of the lotus pond. There was no road. If he wanted to continue walking deeper, he could only pass through the lotus pond. Bai Pai took it out and cut off a lotus. Subai did not rush into the pool, but took the lotus in his hand and looked at it carefully. The lotus is just an ordinary lotus. The lotus pond does not look very deep. There should be mud underneath. As for what is under the mud, it is unknown. Sometimes the thickness of the mud under a pond that is not deep will be very scary. After repeatedly confirming that there was nothing unusual about the lotus in front of him, Subai began to step into the pool. The water only reached Subai's vaginal area, and the mud under his feet was not very thick. Subai continued to walk forward. Naturally, the speed was not very fast. After all, Subai didn't know whether Fatty and the others directly jumped over the danger or removed it. When he reached the center of the pool, Subai's feet seemed to have touched something. From the feel of his feet, they felt very smooth, thick, and long. Subai's first reaction was a snake. In an instant, his whole body tensed up, and a faint green light was already flickering in his pupils. He was planning to transform into a zombie state at the slightest movement. However, after waiting for more than 10 seconds and finding that the thing under his feet was still motionless, Subai took a deep breath and dived into the water. He stretched out his hand to push away the mud below. Sure enough, a giant python about 10 meters long appeared in front of Subai. However, the giant python was obviously dead and motionless. There was another one that almost penetrated the abdomen. Wounds on its body. According to Subai's judgment, the giant python was not only killed, but its inner elixir was also removed. This was in line with the behavior of Fatty and his team, which was to maximize profits by plucking hair. After checking the snake's body, Subai emerged from the water after making sure there was nothing cheap to pick up. 5 minutes later, he crossed the lotus pond and climbed out. After shaking off the water on his body, Subai took off a lotus leaf and wiped his face. Wipe. 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 There is a downward corridor in front, but there is already the sound of sharp weapons rubbing against the rock wall, as if someone is practicing martial arts there. Have you met an aboriginal person? Subai started walking down. After turning a corner, a small pavilion of about 20 square meters appeared in front of Subai. Inside the pavilion, there were 5 or 6 men and women wearing elegant Taoist clothes. While practicing the sword flowers were flying, and the sword energy hit the rock wall from time to time, making the same friction sound that I heard before. Subai's appearance did not seem to disturb them, and they continued to go their own way. This made Subai subconsciously observe them carefully and found that their figures were actually a little blurred. Obviously, they were not real people or ghosts, but an existence similar to a mirage, but they were actually connected. The sound was recorded together, which is quite interesting. Subai planned to pass between them, but when he just stepped on the platform with one foot, something strange happened. This strangeness was not that the original mirage situation suddenly materialized and attacked Subai. In fact, if this was the case, Subai would think it was normal, but the scene in front of him was. Suddenly, a strange flush appeared on the faces of these men and women. Immediately afterwards, they stopped practicing their swordsmanship and started tearing each other's clothes off, and then they had an unabashed and passionate sexual intercourse on the pavilion. In the end, there were 2 men left who didn't have opposite-sex spouses. Start. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 127. This scene came too suddenly and caught people off guard. Subai was completely unprepared. Fortunately, Subai is well informed. This kind of thing does not affect his mind too much, but the scene in front of him has changed from practicing swordsmanship to something unsightly. People were instinctively shocked. Later, Subai regained his composure and keenly noticed that there were dark cloud-like marks on the eyebrows of these men and women. These marks were not there before. Subai could be sure of this. Walking through these images of men and women doing things, it feels similar to the feeling of being in a 5D movie, as if you are immersed in the scene, but if you watch too much, there will be nothing interesting to see, especially these female Taoist priests, wearing Taoist robes and waving their hands. When the sword came, he had a bit of a dusty temperament, but when he took off his clothes and did that kind of thing, his figure seemed too shriveled and not very good looking. This may have something to do with the daily diet of these Taoist priests and the frequent fasting. Relation. When Subai walked past this small pavilion, the spring pictures on the small pavilion were still being performed vividly. Not to mention how durable those men were, Subai also noticed that those men should still look a little immature. And from the analysis of the images, they are not very old. In addition, Taoism pays attention to consolidating the foundation and cultivating the body. Thinking of the environment in the mountains, it is difficult for them to come into contact with female sex. They are all inexperienced and just follow each other in a hurry. Like a quick shooter. But once or twice, it's actually almost the same. They have done it 7 or 8 times in a row, which is already a bit stressful on their bodies. This further proves that from this video record, they should be possessed by evil spirits, which led to such madness. Subai started to do this kind of thing, and Subai even thought that if he did it a few more times, the person below them would start to bleed. After passing the pavilion, we finally arrived at the main hall. It is a building that looks a bit like a Taoist law field. Although it is covered with green tiles, it naturally exudes a Taoist atmosphere and fits perfectly with the surrounding environment. There is only a wooden bridge from Subai's feet to the palace. Generally speaking, bridges are built for humans to cross places that are difficult to cross, such as rivers and valleys. But here, a wooden bridge is a wooden bridge, and there are rocks on the ground below it, at least from Subai's observation. There is no reason to build a bridge here. And it doesn't look like it's used for ornamental purposes. In short, there may be mysteries in every place here. If you are not careful, something may really go wrong, and it may even lead to catastrophe. Subai is very clear about this. Although Fatty and his group are in front of him, but I am not 100% safe. The wooden bridge is not very long, nor is it very high. It is only about 10 meters in length. The height cannot be measured visually, because the bottom of the bridge is not hollow but solid, and it is made very unusual. But no matter what, this wooden bridge is the only way to that palace. After delaying for a while, Subai finally started to get on the bridge. His first step was nothing special. He continued to take 2 steps forward. Subai suddenly saw the thick fog rising in front of him. Subconsciously taking 2 steps back, Subai got off the bridge. Looking ahead, there was no thick fog at all. Licking his lips, Subai knew that there was no other way. He could only know that something was wrong ahead and had to move forward. On the bridge again, Subai was much faster this time. Likewise, thick fog appeared and quickly enveloped Subai. As Subai walked, he realized something was wrong. It was only a dozen meters long bridge. He had almost walked 100 meters. Why couldn't he see anything around except the soles of his feet and the bridge railings on both sides? At this time, a figure appeared in front. The figure was very fat and obviously put on weight. This person's physical characteristics are too obvious, that is, he is fat. Fat man. Subai shouted. But the figure didn't respond at all. When Subai got closer, the other party was still so blurry. However, the closer he got to the shadow, the more Subai felt his steps getting heavier and heavier. This heaviness carried a gradual rhythm, as if he suddenly had a kind of inertia. The inertia was so great that Subai at this time, it was impossible for Bai to put his feet back and retreat. The fat man's figure was like a spiral nest, and the suction force became more and more terrifying. When the suction force reached the top, Subai suddenly couldn't support the pressure and knelt on the ground. Buzz! The surrounding thick fog disappeared in an instant. Subai saw that the bridge under his feet was not a wooden bridge, but a cement bridge. I stood up and looked around. There were villages and towns around me, and there was a river under the bridge. There were several boats in the river, and they were very old-fashioned boats. While Subai was stunned, on the other side of the bridge, a little fat man came skipping towards us with a popsicle in one hand and banknotes in the other. From the little fat man's eyebrows, Subai could tell that that fat man should be the fat man when he was a child. Seeing this scene, Subai knew something in his mind. He should have entered the world of memory, or a spiritual world. As for how this bridge intercepted or imprinted people's memories, Subai couldn't figure it out. No. But Subai knew that he should think of a way to get out of this damn fat man's memory world now. Uncle, you lost your money. Little Fatty had already walked in front of Subai, pointing at the ground and saying. Subai ignored it and just smiled. He had a lot of money, and the way this damn fat man teased people was too low level. Of course, now that he saw that this was a fat man who was probably only about 10 years old when he was a child, he was relieved. Seeing that Subai was not fooled, little Fatty said nothing, pouting and preparing to leave. When he walked to Subai's side, Xiaopang Dun slammed his butt into Subai. Subai had long been aware of the little fat man's intention, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of anger in his heart. If this was really the fat man's memory of the spiritual world, then Subai did have a reason to be angry, because the cement bridge had no railings. Its two large steel plates spliced together across the bridge. This was a relatively common bridge in rural areas 10 years ago, and even now, there are still many such bridges. Little Fatty bumped into Subai, but Subai did not move. Little Fatty himself was bounced away by the reaction force. He staggered to the bridge on the other side in 2 steps. His body shook for a while, as if he was about to fall. Land. Subai stretched out one hand and grabbed the back of the little fat man's neck. It hurts, it hurts. If you don't learn well at such a young age, is there something wrong with your mind? This is murder. Subai knew that Fatty was not a good person, and that underneath his honest appearance was a ruthless heart. But if Fatty had this kind of personality since he was a child, then Subai would really have to think carefully about the way he interacts with Fatty in the future. When I was young, I thought about knocking people into the river because I failed to tease them. What would I do if they drowned? This is not just a naughty child that can explain the past. In fact, in today's internet information age, a child after the age of 10 understands many more things than adults imagine, and many of them are actually hidden under the naughty outer skin. A dirty and terrible heart. I didn't hit a person, I hit a ghost, little Fatty shouted immediately. Ghost. Subai subconsciously looked at the solace of his feet and found that his feet were really hanging in the air, with a gap of several centimeters from the bridge deck. "You ghost, how dare you come out in broad daylight and act so arrogantly? I am the grandson of the boss of Zhongzong Shigong Town. Don't let my grandpa see you, otherwise you will be finished." "Oh, he's pretty cool." Subai smiled, lifted the little fat man off the bridge, and then dropped him on the ground. Little Fatty had previously called his grandpa, "Who is the boss?" This does not mean that he is a member of the underworld, but it is a dialect and saying. The boss is usually the person who organizes the affairs, and is responsible for arranging some funeral-related matters. In the past, he was regarded as a folk Taoist priest. Subai was thinking about how to get out of this fat man's mental world of memory and kill him. Would that be enough? When this idea flashed in Subai's mind, Xiao Pangdun also felt the murderous intent in Subai's eyes, and immediately shrank his neck in fright. Obviously, he was killed by the ghost instead of being beaten into a ghost, and now he doesn't. How much courage do you have left? However, just before Subai could figure out how to clean up the situation and break the situation, an adult and a child walked up on the other side of the path. Both of them were dressed in Tibetan national costumes. The little boy had a dark complexion, a high nose bridge, and walked very calmly, while the adult looked a little old. "Grandpa, when are we going home? Isn't it good here?" "No, I miss the mountains at home and the eagle at home." "Haha, good boy, wait here for your grandpa for a while. When grandpa comes back, I will take you home." "Okay." The little Tibetan boy stood there, while the old man climbed onto the bridge, then crossed the bridge, and then disappeared from sight. Subai looked at the little Tibetan boy, and the more he looked at him, the more he looked like him. Except for the big difference in skin color, he seemed to be carved from the same mold. Just when Subai was about to shout a few questions, another little monk walked up to the bridge. The little monk was a very cute bald man, wearing a blue cassock. He held a Buddhist bead in his left hand and a beggar in his right hand. Bowl. But inside the bowl was not vegetarian food, but coins and banknotes. The young monk tried his best to maintain his demeanor, but every time his eyes fell on the alms bowl in his hand, the corners of his eyes could not help but twitch. Obviously, he himself feels like this. Like a beggar. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 128. Okay, the little fat man, little Gyatso, and the little monk are all here. Subai is now a little confused whether this is Fatty's mental world of memories or someone else's, or are they intertwined with each other. "So, can you also see yourself as a child?" Looking around, Subai couldn't see himself, which made him feel a little disappointed, because he thought that if Gyatso appeared with his grandfather holding his hand, if he appeared as a child, it would be his mother holding his hand. Bar. When the three children looked at each other, Subai suddenly felt that his body began to become lighter and lighter, so light that it was hard to imagine. Subai felt that he was floating higher and higher. Below, the three children were staring at him. They all raised their heads, as if they were still talking and communicating, but Subai couldn't hear them at all. When Subai floated to the clouds, he saw a gentle and intellectual woman walking towards a well-dressed little boy on the bridge below. Subai's lips murmured, but the title was still not spoken out. After so many years, Subai never expected that he would still see her in a place like this. Above the clouds, thick fog shrouded the sky. Soon, the wooden bridge appeared at Subai's feet, with wooden bridge railings on both sides. Subai still had the image of the woman walking with the little boy in her mind. The excitement in his heart could not calm down for a long time, but he still instinctively moved forward. This time, instead of walking hundreds of meters without crossing the bridge like before, he walked after 2 or 3 steps, he walked off the bridge. Ahead was the entrance to the blue-tiled Taoist temple. Subai held one hand on the rock wall and the other on his chest. He gritted his teeth and kept taking deep breaths. He forced himself to hold back the moisture in his eyes. Went back. This is not the time to be sentimental. Even in the real world, when Subai goes to pay homage to his parents' tombstones every Qingming festival, he won't shed a single tear. Subai took a long breath and calmed down completely. He turned around and saw the bridge pier behind him. There were words on the bridge pier. Subai couldn't understand it. But when he looked back at the bridge, some things became clear naturally. A bridge should be able to record some memories of people who pass by it. It seems that Fatty, Gyatso and the monk have passed by. Are they in the palace in front now? First there is the unmarked tombstone, then there is the monster snake and python in the lotus pond, and then there is this wooden bridge. This Taoist law field in Fulong Mountain has fully demonstrated its unusualness. In front of him, the most mysterious and most likely place where good things could be found was already in front of him. In Subai's heart, he felt more of a deep uneasiness than a passion for Dobeo. The uneasy feeling comes from what I see and feel along the way, especially the men and women on the pavilion. Because no matter how you look at it, it doesn't look like a so-called real Taoist law field. It is simply more tantric than tantric. Stepping forward, Subai was getting closer and closer to the door of the palace, but the uneasiness in his heart kept rising. His palm was pressed against the door. The door was very tall and had been opened not long ago, so there were traces of this. When I opened the door, a rotten smell that had been trapped for a long time hit my face. Sure enough, this dojo was either abandoned or something unexpected happened. You came. At this time, a very weak voice came into Subai's ears. The man was inside the door, leaning against the door. When Subai walked in, he was leaning less than 5 meters away from Subai. It's Gyatso. At this time, Gyatso was even more miserable than after his duel with Subai. His only remaining arm was almost bent and resting on his torso, and there was a huge blood hole in his chest that kept pouring out. The blood was flowing and even the beating of the heart could be vaguely seen. His legs were pierced together by a spear, like a bamboo stick piercing 2 pieces of pork belly. Subai walked over and knelt down in front of Gyatso. You're not even dead, your vitality is really scary. Subai really didn't know how to use sentimental words to comfort people, but he was really good at using tricks to add insult to injury. Gyatso had no intention of quarreling with Subai. All his energy were now focused on prolonging his own life. Most people would have died long ago after suffering such a serious injury, but Gyatso did not. This came from the eminent monks in Tibet have a perseverance as towering as a mountain. At this time, death may actually be a kind of relief. A guy wearing Jin's armor was lying next to him. His helmet had been smashed and his head was exploded, but no blood was spilled. Subai could tell that this should be a so-called Taoist golden armored warrior, but why? It looks like a zombie puppet wearing armor. It looks holy and glorious on the outside, but it is extremely dirty on the inside. Subai reached out and took off the helmet, revealing a ferocious head. The head had been sunken, and it was hollow inside, but mercury was still gurgling out. Mercury corpse, Subai said. Gyatso nodded, yes, mercury corpse. Mercury kills corpses. A person with great grievances is chosen to be tied up first, and then a hole is made from the back of the person's head. Mercury is poured into the person while he is still alive, causing the person to endure an unimaginable torture, even this kind of torture. Under this method, even if you die midway, your soul will still not be freed. It will definitely continue to be imprisoned in the body, and then fixed with some magic spells, and finally become a mercury evil corpse. Generally, this kind of corpse can only the kind that only appeared in the tombs of ancient princes, generals, and ministers, and were regarded as tomb guardians. Back then, the Red Eyebrow Army revolted and dug up the tombs of Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty and Lu Pheasant. There were 2 Mercury evil corpses in Lu Pheasant's tomb. The Red Eyebrow army suffered heavy losses when digging the tombs. In the end, the Red Eyebrow army died to vent their anger on themselves. The brothers took revenge and took Lu Pheasant's body one by one to, which is not a Taoist execution ground. Subai joked, "The Mercury evil corpses have come out, there won't be any old zombie king inside, it's the Taoist master himself. The location where the fox senses is right here. The baby is in front. The distance is not far away," Gyatso said. "The fat man and the monk have already moved on, so they left you here alone. You don't have to pretend to be nice." Haha, Subai clapped his hands and smiled, "Should I wait here with you for them to take the child out and then leave together, or should I follow him too?" "You can stay here to protect me," Gyatso looked at Subai, "but I know you won't do that. Don't be so direct. How can you happily stab each other in the back in the future?" Subai took out a small bottle from his arms and handed the bottle to Gyatso. "This is the red pill you got me before. You should also replenish your blood." Subai grabbed a handful and brought it to Gyatso's mouth. Gyatso was not polite and swallowed it all. "Don't worry, I won't die until you come back." Subai shook his head, placed the small bottle next to Gyatso, and then continued walking inside. The palace is very large, and this is just an entrance. Going forward, there are many immortal sculptures. These sculptures are not as crude as the statues of gods that Subai has seen before in the real world. The immortal sculptures here are all lifelike. 10 minutes later, Subai arrived at the exit of this palace. There were many side halls and practice rooms, but Subai didn't enter any of them. It was too natural to think about making some unexpected fortune at this time. After walking out of the temple, there was a cliff in front of me. On the edge of the cliff, there was a thatched house. This is the complete end. Subai had a hunch that the child should be in the thatched house. However, the scene outside the thatched house is a bit alarming. There are broken limbs and remains everywhere. These corpses are all zombies. Being able to beat the zombies like this is enough to show the fierceness of the previous battle here. There was a knife inserted into the rock wall next to the thatched house. On the knife, there was a person, and the fat man was nailed to it. He closed his eyes and was completely silent. When Subai walked over, he almost thought that the fat man was dead, but the fat man seemed to sense Subai's arrival and slowly opened his eyes. He was actually using the Taoist turtle breath technique before. "Not dead?" Subai asked. Soon Fatty replied. "If I were you, I would just walk out like this," Subai said. "I am not you, and this knife has suppressed my soul. If I forcefully walk out, even if my body does not die, my soul will be annihilated first." "Where's the monk?" "In the house." Subai pursed his lips and asked, "How long have you been in there?" "It's been more than an hour," the fat man smiled. "It doesn't matter whether you come or not, we are all in trouble anyway." "I'll try. Come and stay with me early." Subai walked past the fat man, walked to the thatched house, and opened the door. The layout of the thatched house is simple and antique. The monk sat at a table. Across the table hangs a painting. In the painting is the old man Subai saw. The style of this painting is no different from the one hanging on the wall to ward off evil spirits that Subai saw in a small town in before. However, in this painting, under the old man's feet, there are more a child playing, and playing looks very cute. When Subai came in, the monk didn't even turn his eyes. He continued to recite sutras with his hands clasped together, as if he was talking about Buddhism and Taoism with the person in the painting. However, when Subai walked around from behind, he saw the monk's face. The back area is already soaked, not with sweat, but with blood. There were even a few eagles standing silently on the chairs behind the monk, and from time to time they took a piece of meat from the monk's back and swallowed it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Long. Chapter 129. The monk is still reciting the sutras, his expression remains unchanged, as if he has become detached from the outside world and has not noticed anything. In other words, his spirit has entered another place. For example, in this painting, Subai smiled. It was a bit heartless to laugh at this time, but he knew that the monk wouldn't care. He had walked all the way before, and Gyatso and Fatty didn't even look at him because they didn't care. Would mind such a thing. On the one hand, this is a rule that everyone has agreed upon. The 8 immortals cross the sea and each show their magical powers. Depending on their own abilities, they can eat as much as they can. As for what will happen afterwards, they are too lazy to waste their efforts to get angry with you and make superficial efforts. On the other hand, the main mission too is so difficult now. One more Subai is not a lot, and one less Subai is not a lot, so they all look away. Yes, they have looked away, because the further they go in, the more powerless and desperate they feel. In the main hall, Gyatso fought a golden armored warrior by himself and killed him, but he could not walk any further. In the front yard of the thatched house, Fatty seemed to have triggered the thunder again and killed the zombies blocking the road. However, this time the backlash was even more terrifying, and he himself was nailed to the rock wall. In fact, this can be regarded as a kind of doing one's best and obeying fate. Gyatso's legs were pierced by a spear, and his one arm was disabled. He was already dying. The fat man had to rely on the turtle-breathing kung fu to survive. The monk is in this situation now. It is true that the group is not far away from being destroyed. With Subai's ability, if he was facing an enemy, there might be a chance to turn around, but this time he faced a situation that was very powerless and hopeless. Even now, he could not even fight against the real enemy he faced. Who is he, and what is the meaning of everything he did before? Ever since he went up the mountain, Subai felt very depressed in his heart. This was a feeling that was difficult to describe in words, as if he was taking the initiative to enter the tiger's mouth. Subai had seen the old man in the painting himself, and the boy at the old man's feet was that little guy. Subai could be sure of this. However, while they were in the painting, Subai couldn't carry a painting out and send it to the demon cave. Things wouldn't be that simple, otherwise the monk wouldn't have to cut the flesh to feed the eagles here. The monk was still working hard, Subai could see it. He squatted down by the door, looking left and right. In the end, his eyes fell on the monk's back. The eagles obviously began to eat slower and slower, and even seemed to be shaky when eating. Cutting meat to feed the eagle is a Buddhist illusion, which reflects a kind of great compassion, but there is also great danger in great compassion. When feeding meat to an eagle, the Buddha abandons the meat and takes it with him, as well as cause and effect. What the eagle eats is meat, and what it swallows is cause and effect. Subai didn't know much about Buddhist principles, but he knew one thing. With the way a monk dealt with things, he would never do such a thing that was purely about cutting meat to feed eagles in order to gain fame. He was the only audience here. Who did he do it for? Look. Sure enough, after a while, the portrait began to tremble, and the characters in the picture began to become more and more lifelike. After a while, the old man stretched out his hand from inside, brought it to the monk, and turned the palm and back of his palm over to the monk. The monk looked at it, closed his eyes again, and shook his head. Immediately, the palm retracted into the portrait. In the portrait, the old man was holding a baby in one hand and a cane in the other, walking among the mountains and rivers, enjoying himself. If it was before, Subai really thought that this old man was a real Taoist, but what he saw along the way was that this old man was by no means as simple as he originally thought. The monk sighed, his body swayed, and he fell to the ground. Subai coughed and reached out to pat the monk's face. "Monk, monk. The monk opened his eyes slightly and said, "It's over, it's all over. Don't be so pessimistic. Everything is negotiable." The monk shook his head, and blood began to flow from his eyes, ears, mouth, and nose, and it was golden blood, which was the monk's natal blood. "What should we do next?" Subai asked. "There is nothing he can do. He is neither a Taoist nor a Buddhist. He is a demon who has occupied a magpie's nest and doves," the monk said slowly. "A man who has occupied a magpie's nest and doves wants to steal. The demon of righteousness. Magic. The devil occupying the magpie nest? That demon gave him a continuing pill?" The monk's breath was still there, but the air coming out was more than the air coming in. He was obviously in a state of overdraft. Subai stood up and walked to the portrait. "The goal of myself and the three fat men before me was just this painting. Now I see the painting, but I don't know how to get the child who is required by the task. It is really just a layer of paper separated from success, but this layer of paper seems to be separated by the end of the world." The screen trembled, and a ripple appeared. An old but white hand stretched out and placed it in front of Subai. "Do you choose to enter the painting with me? In the painting, eternal life is obtained." The voice was very old, but Subai was sure that it was the old man's voice. However, the old man's voice at this time seemed much deeper than when they first met in the fishing boat on the river. "Cold texture. Don't think about it." This was the answer given by Subai, and the picture scroll gradually returned to normal. Subai really had no choice but to refuse, because he didn't believe that the existence in the painting could really be bigger than the terrorist broadcast. He would not get any immortality in it. Once the 30-day mission expired, he would be obliterated. Can anyone stop it? Just when Subai felt that nothing had happened, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if his heart was about to leave his body. Ah 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 ah. Subai knelt on the ground, his face was full of pain, and he was sweating profusely. The monk watched from the side, just like how Subai watched the monk cut meat and feed it to the eagle. At the same time, there was a hint of pity in the monk's eyes. At least he knew how to use Buddhist principles to try to open and control the painting. Although he failed, this was actually the right way. And Subai, who just went up and stunned King Tu. If he refused, no wonder he would endure the pain he is experiencing now. Subai's breathing began to become very rapid, and he pressed his chest with both hands. His heart really began to feel like it was going to drill out. This feeling was extremely involved and painful. After the fat man woke up after being disturbed by Subai, he was too lazy to continue to rest. He could sense the situation in the thatched house, and his lips suddenly murmured, "That's not right. It's a completely unsolvable main quest too. Is the terrorist broadcast deliberately trying to destroy our group?" Gyatso leaned against the wall, his lips were white and his breathing was weak, but his brows were still frowning, because he couldn't figure it out. This time, it seemed that there was really no way to fight back after the group was wiped out. In the end, after all the hard work, we encountered an unsolvable situation. Did the horror broadcast deliberately want all the listeners in this story to be wiped out here? This is not in line with the habit of horror broadcasting. At least, he will let one or two people survive. At least, he will give him a chance to survive and a breakthrough. The monk who fell to the ground recited Amitabha silently in his heart. Seeing Subai kneeling on the ground with a painful look on his face, he also had doubts in his heart. A mission to destroy the group without giving a chance at all? Impossible. Subai gritted his teeth and resisted the pain. Now, he suddenly felt that it didn't make any difference whether he arrived early or late. It didn't make any difference whether Fatty and the others were trying to get him in front of him, because in the end, he met this person. A painting whose strength and realm clearly surpassed that of myself and others, making all of this meaningless. However, at this moment, a loud shout came from outside. A man wearing a Taoist robe walked past him. Gyatso was a little surprised. There was also an audience. But, immediately, he saw Lin Zhenying. It's him. What is he here for? Lin Zhenying did not look at Gyatso, but continued walking inside. The fat man looked at Lin Zhenying walking step by step and grinned. Damn it, I said it couldn't be a dead end, and he was there. Lin Zhenying pushed open the thatched hut and walked in. The monk's breathing suddenly became faster. And him? Subai was a little stunned and looked at Lin Zhenying standing in front of him. Lin Zhenying only had this painting in his eyes. Back then, you occupied my mountain gate, killed my brothers, and killed my master and master. Now, I'm here to collect debts. A few days ago, in the zombie cave, I was poisoned and my cultivation was about to weaken. This also forced me to make up my mind. I can no longer be cowardly and live an ignoble existence. I must avenge my master's sect. Using myself as a medium to inspire the awe-inspiring righteousness of those who have practiced Taoism in Fulong Mountain for thousands of years, I will perish together with you, the devil. Subai suddenly thought of the memory of the zombie king he saw when he faced the zombie king before. In the memory, Lin Zhenying was so majestic and heroic, and he beat him and fled in panic. This was very different from the Lin Zhenying he felt. Now it seems so. In fact, Lin Zhenying has always had a backup plan, and it is not as simple as it seems. Is he the key to breaking this game? Gyatso's eyes were opened vigorously, and the fat man's hands were slightly clenched. The monk used his last strength to say Amitabha. Subai pressed his heart and looked at Lin Zhenying. Lin Zhenying raised the peachwood sword in his hand, and for a moment, he was filled with righteousness and thunder. At this moment, in the portrait, the old man stretched out a hand and pointed here. Lin Zhenying trembled, a wisp of blood spilled from the corner of his mouth, and then fell to the ground, making no sound. Gyatso spit out a mouthful of blood. The fat man's mouth was open and he didn't know how to close it. The monk's second prayer to Amitabha got stuck in his throat and he didn't know how to spit it out. Subai staggered while kneeling on the ground. Appearing at such a critical moment. Appearing in such style. Immediately. So. Died. Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 130. At this moment, the four people, Subai, Monk, Gyatso, and Fatty, felt as if they had fallen to the bottom, then rose to the sky again with Lin Zhenying's timely appearance, but then suddenly died with Lin Zhenying's death. The hearts of the four people felt as if they had been smashed into the abyss. Brother, if you don't choose such a good time to show up, damn, you finished the first call but died without even releasing your ultimate move in the end. If you don't choose such a good time to show up, you're just kidding. The fat man was still nailed to the rock wall. He wanted to cry now, really wanted to cry. This. Gyatso tilted his head back and leaned against the wall in pain. Lin Zhenying's breath disappeared in an instant. What did this mean? He knew clearly that at this time, even if the wound was involved and caused severe pain, but he still wanted to laugh and smiled bitterly. Ami. The monk spit out two words, but swallowed the last two words, and closed his eyes, as if he didn't want to look at the world one more time, and he had no more love in his life. Subai covered his chest and knelt on the ground with his head on the ground, which happened to be very close to Lin Zhenying's head. Lin Zhenying died very simply, and even a touch of fortitude could be seen. You can still see the hatred for evil forces on his face. I can see the determination and great dedication that I am willing to die with the devil. I saw the greatness of sacrificing oneself for the sake of peace and prosperity in the world. But he's still dead. Brother, why did you come out? Subai muttered while enduring the severe pain in his chest. He suddenly felt that even if his heart was not in severe pain because of the portrait, it would still be shocked because of Lin Zheniying's gorgeous appearance and instant curtain call. A wooden bowl appeared in the hand of the old man in the portrait, and then he threw the wooden bowl in front of him. This bowl is not used to hold rice, but to hold souls. A ray of white light shot out from the portrait and fell on Gyatso first. Gyatso's body was too damaged to be broken anymore, but his inner desire for life had never changed. What the portrait wanted were soul puppets, so he needed to subdue these souls. Gyatso's whole body was wrapped in white light. Subsequently, he stood up. In front of him, his master appeared. "Disciple, kneel down." The master's face was still kind. "No, master, I won't kneel." Gyatso's answer was very firm. He knew where this place was, and he also knew that this was not his master. However, this feeling and the master's voice and appearance were exactly the same, which made Gyatso feel deep in his heart a hint of doubt. The master's appearance disappeared, and then, an old man appeared in front of Gyatso. The old man looked at Gyatso with a gentle smile. "I am the living Buddha, please kneel down." "You are not a living Buddha, you are a devil," Gyatso roared. "In addition to discrimination and disaster, what else have you brought to our people?" The old man's figure disappeared. But immediately afterwards, Sanskrit sounds. A true Buddha appears with overwhelming power, the Buddha's light flashes, and has an irresistible power. This is the power of Buddha, this is the authority of Buddha. Gyatso's chest made a muffled sound, and then he had to lower his head. This is the power of the Buddha. This is really the power of the Buddha. This is the totem he has believed in since he was a child, it is his belief and his spiritual pillar. Snapped. There was nothing he could do. Gyatso knelt down. In the portrait, there is an extra face in the old man's bowl, a face belonging to Gyatso. Immediately afterwards, the second white light shot out of the portrait and fell on the fat man. The fat man stood up in the white light, but continued to mutter. You, fat grandpa. Fat grandpa will never kneel down. My dear grandson, you won't kneel down when you see your grandpa." An old man wearing liberation clothes stood in front of the fat man. It looks so similar, grandpa, if I hadn't personally sent you to the crematorium for cremation, I would have thought you had turned your body into a rice dumpling. You brat, are you talking to grandpa like this? Grandpa has repeatedly told you not to send him to the crematorium. You should leave a whole body for him and bury him in the grave he chose before he was alive. That's not true. It's a lucky hole. Grandpa is buried there to keep our family safe from disasters. Grandpa didn't sell this piece of land no matter how high the price others offered. The fat man immediately said with a mournful face, "Grandpa, I listened to your words and buried you there with my father, but who knows who secretly reported it to someone in the village. As a result, someone from the government came and forced us to bury you there. You dug it out and sent it for cremation, but there's nothing I can do about it. That's all. Maybe this is because our family is unhappy. If you kowtow to Grandpa, Grandpa will forgive you." The fat man immediately wiped away his tears and said with a playful smile, "Master, if you want to kowtow, it's no problem. When the holidays come, my grandson will go to your cemetery to kowtow. I can kowtow to you as many grandsons as you want." The old man's figure disappeared immediately as the fat man's words fell. The fat man smacked his lips. "I want to trick your fat master into kowtow, haha, he's still a little too young." At this time, the surrounding scene changed instantly. Fatty found himself standing on a cement bridge. This scene made Fatty tremble in his heart. Then, he slowly looked outside and saw a man falling under the bridge. In the water, he could no longer struggle and began to sink slowly, but his eyes remained fixed on himself. Plop! The fat man knelt on the concrete bridge. In an instant, a shadowy figure of a little fat man appeared next to him. He was holding a popsicle in one hand and holding change in the other hand. He was looking down with a shocked expression. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Fatty kept saying, "Sorry, I didn't mean it, I really didn't mean it, it was just a joke, I didn't think you would drown." In the portrait, there is another face in the old man's wooden bowl, the face of a fat man. Then, white light shot out again and fell on the monk. The monk also stood up surrounded by white light, and in front of him, an ancient Buddha appeared. Amitabha, the monk clasped his hands together to express respect. "Kneel down to me," Buddha said. The monk shook his head and smiled, "I will eventually become a Buddha, so there is no need to kneel to the Buddha." As soon as he finished speaking, the Buddha disappeared. Immediately afterwards, a woman appeared in front of the monk. The woman was wearing a shabby down jacket and pushing a tricycle to sell scraps. The monk's Adam's apple moved uncontrollably at this moment. The woman's car is very heavy. In order to take care of her bedridden husband and to send money to her children who are practicing in the monastery, she wakes up early and works hard at night to collect a lot of waste products. While going uphill, the woman's feet slipped and the car failed to push up. As a result, the car slipped and she was brought down. She fell to the ground with blood on her palms and knees. The woman spit on the palm of her hand, blew the dust off, then clenched her fists, got up again, and pushed the tricycle up again. When the monk saw this scene, he sighed. Amitabha. In his life, he was not ashamed of anyone but his mother. He insisted on becoming a monk and made the burden of the family fall on his mother. When he returned home after completing his studies, his father had passed away. His mother was also terminally ill and dying. Not long after seeing him back, her mother passed away as if her greatest wish had been fulfilled. The monk didn't even have time to change his cassock into casual clothes. Slowly, the monk knelt down. In the portrait, there is another face in the old man's wooden bowl, that of a monk. At this time, Gyatso was still leaning miserably against the wall of the hall, the fat man was still nailed to the rock wall, and the monk was still lying in the thatched house. The bodies of the three of them had not completely lost their activity, but their souls had been included in the painting. Middle. Sudbai blinked, and then, white light fell on him. Finally. "It's my turn." In the white light, Sudbai felt that the pain on his body completely disappeared. But his heart was very heavy. The fat man knelt down, Gyatso also knelt down, and even the most tenacious and terrifying monk knelt down. Sudbai was not sure whether he could insist on not kneeling. He had even guessed what scene would appear in front of him and made him kneel. Before. Gyatso knelt because of his belief since childhood. He had to not kneel, even if he knew in his heart that it was false, even if he knew what would happen if he knelt down, he still had to kneel. If he didn't kneel, that would be destroyed his own spiritual support and destroyed his own faith. The fat man saw that when he was a child, he knocked a man into the river because of his so-called naughty, and then the man drowned. This has always been the fat man's nightmare. Even though he killed many people later, he killed all the others. Killing him, it didn't matter, but he could never forget this person, or this look in his eyes. He would never forget it for the rest of his life. With a guilt that lasted for more than 10 or even 20 years, the fat man knelt down. The monk saw his mother. He had no reason not to kneel down, so he knelt down. Because he feels too guilty about his mother. If it weren't for his selfishness, if it wasn't for his own insistence, if he was at home, his mother's life would be at least a little more relaxed and joyful. The other three people knelt down, and Sudbai was already waiting. Now that he knows, he probably can't resist kneeling down, but Sudbai really hopes to see his parents again. Anyway, there is no hope of making a comeback. He wants to see his parents before he dies and hear their words again. Sound. It feels pretty good too. However, Sudbai waited for a long time, and there was nothing but white light around him. What's wrong? Just when Sudbai was confused, Subai heard the sound of little fleshy feet running on the ground in the white light. Subai turned around following the sound. He saw a white and tender little guy crawling towards him. The little guy was wearing a red belly band and looked even more adorable. As he crawled towards Subai, he kept waving his little hands. "Please give me a hug." Xiaolong also opened his hands. "Please give me monthly tickets, please give me rewards, please give me a hug." Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Xiaolong. Chapter 131. The little guy is still so fair and tender, especially when he saw Subai, his little mouth smiled and his eyes narrowed to a slit. You can see how happy he was at this time. He opened his arms, just like before. Every time he would stupidly climb onto the bed and ask for a hug from Subai, then he would be kicked off by Subai, and then he would climb back up and continue. He was always so happy with it. Subai was about to kneel down and hug him, but he immediately climbed back. Subai was stunned. The little guy tried his best to stand up with his little hands, and staggered towards Subai. He walked very unsteadily, like a drunkard, but he still staggered up to Subai and gave him a hand. He hugged Subai's calf. Subai stretched out his hand to him, and he grabbed it. Subai used strength to hold him into his arms. The little guy kept rubbing his face towards Subai's chest affectionately, obviously missing Subai. Subai patted the little guy's buttocks. He was going to kneel down and hug him before, which was also a test. Compared with this little guy's innocent heart, Subai felt a little dirty. However, Subai was just out of habit. He didn't dare to trust anyone here. The old man's figure appeared in the white light. He looked older than when they met on the fishing boat in the river. He had told Subai before that he was already over 120 years old. At that time, Subai thought that he was still in good health and would live another life. It's not a problem to be 6 years old, but now, with white hair, haggard appearance, and cloudy eyes, it's obvious that his days are numbered. Subai looked at the old man, and the old man looked at Subai. "You want to follow him?" There was a rare kindness in the old man's eyes when he looked at the little guy. Before, he had absolutely no sympathy for Gyatso, the monk, or the fat man. Even according to what Lin Zhenying said, he had no sympathy for this Taoist sect that was originally located in Fulong Mountain. There was no mercy at all, and the unsightly scene of those men and women still being shown on the small pavilion can be regarded as a kind of lashing and ridicule of the sect for decades. The little guy looked at the old man and then at Subai, hesitating to speak, but after a brief hesitation, he still clenched Subai's collar with both hands. Obviously, he wanted to follow Subai. "He will leave you. He is not from this world." When the old man said this, he paused, then his eyes wandered, looked at the sky, and then sighed, "Your choice is wrong. I am together, I will pass on your mantle, your Taoist tradition, your demonic tradition, and I will pass on you this blessed land of Fulong Mountain Cave to be your Dharma field. In the future, if you want to be a devil, you are a devil. If you think of Confucianism and Taoism, it is Tao. Isn't this great?" The little guy shook his head. Obviously, he still refused. The old man looked at Subai, knowing that persuading this little guy was of no use. "Young man, I know where you came from and where you will go, but I can't explain it clearly. You should also know that he likes you and wants to follow you, but you can't give him much time at all, can you? I can let you go, as long as you keep him here. I am tired and the end is approaching. No matter whether it is a Buddha or a demon, I don't want to bother anymore. I just want to find a successor." Subai shook his head. "You know, I'm not a good person." Indeed, Subai is not a good person, and more importantly, if this little guy is left here, Subai's main mission too will be doomed to fail and will be directly obliterated by the terrorist broadcast. "It's so selfish of you to do this," the old man said. "Yes, I am selfish," Subai admitted openly. Then I can't let you go. The turbid color in the old man's eyes suddenly disappeared, revealing a clear color, and then, a sharp breath rose from the old man's body. The little guy reacted before Subai. He opened his mouth and bit the air in front of him a few times. Cracks appeared in the white light. The old man's eyes were horrified. Subai stretched out his hand, grabbed the gap, and then tore open the white light. There was a crisp sound of crack. Subai was still squatting on the ground in the thatched house. The little guy was still in Subai's arms. The scroll in front of him had been torn open. You will regret it. The old man in the portrait knocked over his wooden bowl, and then his eyes wandered on Subai and the little guy. You will regret it. There was a meaningful smile on the old man's face. Even Subai himself couldn't understand whether the old man's regret was referring to himself or the little one in his arms. The scroll began to burn, and the scene in the scroll changed. The old man stood on a high mountain and looked into the distance. This seemed to be the final ending he had arranged for himself. The scroll burned completely, leaving no trace of dust behind, and turned into curls of green smoke. The fat man, the monk, and Gyatso, who were already unconscious, all opened their eyes and woke up at this time. Subai stood up, and the little guy climbed onto Subai's shoulders, sat down with his little butt, and held Subai's hair with one hand to steady himself. I don't want to lie to you. In fact, he is right. I will leave, and I will leave soon. Subai patted the little guy's belly with his hand. The little guy was amused and giggled, then he blew gently into Subai's ears. The monk was still lying on the ground. Seeing this scene, he was a little relieved and a little weak. He just shouted silently. Amitabha, Subai, saving one life is better than building a 7-level pagoda. Subai looked at the monk and smiled. In the carriage, 3 seriously injured people, Gyatso, Fatty, and Monk, were lying inside. Their injuries were not light, and could even be said to be very serious. Subai drove a carriage, and the little guy sat on the back of the horse, bumping along with the horse. How long is it until we reach the demon cave? The fat man asked feebly. At the current rate, it will take another day and a half to 2 days. Then this mission will be almost completed. Fatty felt as if his nightmare was finally coming to an end. The monk had a heavy look on his face and shook his head, not necessarily. The 30-day mission has not passed for a few days now. It would be too easy for us to end the mission hastily. You call this relaxing? Monk, don't you see how miserable we are? The fat man was obviously speechless. If Subai had not ended the shackles of the painting on us with the help of the child, but had used other methods, then the poor monk would have felt that the story should be over, but he took us down in this way. Mountains, the hardships and tribulations ahead have become worthless in the smooth sailing at the last moment. Horror radio is about telling stories. To end this ordeal that almost wiped out our whole group with such a plot that makes radio listeners find it unbelievable, don't you think it's not bloody? So, monk, you mean, it will continue to remedy the situation, the fat man said a little speechlessly. Gyatso opened his eyes at this time and said, Tang monk and his disciples have just taken the scriptures from Laiyan temple. Lord Buddha and Guanyin calculated it. They have one less problem. They will even be there when Tang monk and his disciples return to make up for this difficulty before the Tang dynasty. Can't we do the same with terrorist broadcasts? On Fulong Mountain, inside the thatched house, curls of green smoke gathered from all directions, recondensing a painting. In the painting, the old man was still standing on the cliff, looking towards the sky. In an instant, thunder rolled in the air, and the portrait kept trembling, as if it could not withstand this terrible power. The old man stood in the painting, looked at the sky, and said in a deep voice, You are blaming me for not doing things as you asked, right? The thunder still roared with fury. The world is unkind and treats all things as stupid dogs. This is probably the artistic conception. I really like that kid, and I want him to pass on my mantle. Haha, I'm sorry, it went against your will. The old man opened his arms and roared. I am a demon and a Taoist. I steal the orthodoxy and live alone. Do you need a bitch like you to hide behind my back and point fingers at me? Boom. A thunderbolt fell and hit the old man. The old man completely disappeared in laughter. In Subai's story world last time, the black shopkeeper was willful and finally let Subai and Sophia leave safely, and even accepted a cigarette from Subai. In this story world, the old man used his own the will forcibly rejected the arrangement of the terror broadcast, which meant that the terror broadcast's control over the awakened NPCs in the story world was somewhat out of control. Dear listeners, I am sorry to tell you some bad news. Our program needs to be suspended for 3 months due to equipment failure and other reasons. During these 3 months, our program will not be able to accompany you. Of course, we will finish telling the several stories in progress this time and give the audience a wonderful and interesting ending. I believe that when broadcasting starts again in 3 months, any problems will be solved and uncontrollable situations will not occur again. We will once again adapt the story based on real cases for you. Thank you for your support. We will continue to meet here in 3 months. Mashed potatoes, mashed potatoes, mashed potatoes. I said, Smith, do you have anything else besides potatoes in this church? A bald white man slapped his spoon on the table and said angrily. Sean, pay attention to your attitude. A blond young man sitting opposite Sean scolded his teammate, and at the same time scooped up mashed potatoes with a spoon and put it into his mouth. He had no special requirements for food. There were 4 Westerners sitting at this table, and an old priest stood beside the table. He said apologetically, I'm sorry, that's all we have left in the church now. I think you are hiding it secretly from us, Sean snorted. Really not, the Lord is watching me in heaven, the old priest said. Sean, we are in the Qing dynasty now, and there are still several decades before the First Opium War. The conditions for priests who can come to China to preach are very difficult. You must respect them. Sean nodded and sighed. Mikhail, I'm just complaining a little. Eat, Mikhail said to the 3 companions beside him. After eating, think of a way to trigger the main mission. At the feet of these Westerners, there was a package containing the heads of the Eastern listeners they met along the way. One of their side tasks was to kill these Eastern listeners. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Terror Broadcast. Author, Chunji Dixiaolong. Chapter 132. After finishing the meal, Sean stood up, came to the door of the restaurant, stretched his body, and complained a little. Mikhail, I don't want to eat mashed potatoes for my next meal, this is terrible. Mikhail also put down the spoon and was wiping his mouth with a silk cloth. When he heard Sean's words, he said calmly. Do you know that when we leave this church and walk out, we will immediately become the center of attention? So what? This time we were inexplicably transported to the Qing dynasty in the east, but this dynasty doesn't mean that Westerners like us must be killed when they see us on the street. It's still okay for us to go out for a meal. Bar. At this time, Peas and Ja, who were still sitting in their seats, had also finished eating, but they tacitly agreed not to join in the conversation. They also expressed their disapproval of Mikhail's almost strict and harsh management team. The method was a little disgusting, but Mikhail's qualifications and status were indeed much higher than them. Therefore, even if the difference in strength between everyone was not obvious, no one dared to contradict his authority face to face, and only Sean, the bald man, a fool, can use his stupidity to rush Mikhail. Our side mission is to kill the Eastern listeners. This is their home court. We have to be careful. Once we go out, even if we imitate the priest's behavior and habits, we will reveal that we are modern people. Hidden Oriental listeners who don't know our identity among the crowd will be able to know our identity. So what if I know? Sean walked over directly and took out the package from under the table and opened it. 5 or 6 heads rolled out, all with oriental faces. Haha, even if they know it, what can they do? When the priest saw the scene of heads on the ground, he trembled with fright. He took a few steps back and began to pray, "Merciful Lord." Mikhail glanced at the heads on the ground and looked at Sean. "Do you think all Eastern listeners are so weak? I believe that in this story world, there must be strong Eastern players that we should deal with seriously, but we haven't met them yet. The more Eastern listeners we kill, it means that we are closer to meeting the truly powerful Eastern players. The audience probability is getting bigger and bigger. Therefore, at this time, we cannot take it lightly. I don't want anyone in our team to die because of this unnecessary carelessness. Moreover, our main mission has not been triggered yet. When we don't know what the main mission is, we must hide ourselves as much as possible." Mikhail stood up and bowed to the priest. "Dear priest, please arrange a place for me to rest." The shocked priest immediately nodded and took Mikhail out of the restaurant to the bedroom. Sean put his hands on his hips, blew a breath, and looked at Peas and Ja. "Everyone, as you can see, Mikhail is like a timid little kitten." Both Peas and Jerry leaned on their chairs, looking very lazy. "I miss my cigars." Peas touched his red hair and said sadly, "Here, there is no coffee or cigars that I like to drink, only mashed potatoes that I have to eat forever." "Sean, it's not just you, I've actually had enough. I even think that the reason why we didn't trigger the main mission is because we are too low-key. We have been hiding silently and doing it ourselves in the dark. For us, the exposure rate is too low and the impact is too low. If we are more high profile and have a wider scope of influence, maybe the main task will be triggered, and we don't have to continue to stick to one here. The side quests have been waiting for a long time. Although these Eastern listeners are quite easy to kill, there aren't many story points left among the few of us." Peas was arranging his hair sadly. Obviously, he was also very dissatisfied with this situation, but he was not like Sean, a reckless man who dared to say anything in front of Mikhail. "Just bear with it a little longer. It won't take long. Even if we are willing, the terrorist broadcasters won't want us to continue wasting our time in this church eating mashed potatoes. If we don't find something to do, according to the habits of terrorist broadcasters, he will also take the initiative to find things for us to do." Although I don't agree with Mikhail's overly cautious and conservative style, but in a certain sense, he did not do anything wrong. Perhaps, we do need a little patience. Sean was very happy when he saw that his two teammates were echoing him from the front or from the side. His brain was of the same kind, and he was strengthened as a werewolf, which further highlighted his character traits through his bloodline. "Come out. Have you eaten enough?" Sean put his hand on the table and looked at his two companions. "I feel a little regretful now. Why did I just cut off the heads of these Oriental people and bring them back as souvenirs? I didn't cut off a few pieces of meat from them and bring them back, otherwise we would all be able to barbecue them now. There are 2 Oriental women among them, and the 2 pieces of meat on their chests must be delicious." Sean actually drooled as he spoke. Peas looked at Sean with some surprise. "Sean, your taste is beyond our imagination. Please stay away from me. I am an elegant gentleman." Ja also nodded. "This is really unimaginable. You actually want to eat human flesh." "Hey, I'm a wolf. Wolves naturally eat meat, and human meat is my favorite too." Sean didn't take it seriously. He was very satisfied with his companion's reaction to him, feeling that it was for him. A kind of recognition, wolf, is to be ferocious, to make others afraid of itself. "You guys sit down, I will go shopping nearby." After Sean finished speaking, he opened the church door and prepared to go out. Peas stood up and said, "Sean, it's better not to go out. Mikhail will be angry if he finds out." Sean was stunned for a moment. Obviously, although he seemed to be disdainful of Mikhail, deep down in his heart, he was still afraid of that guy who was always calm and calm. But it was too embarrassing for him, who had just spoken in such a high-profile manner, to back off when he heard Mikkel's name. Sean waved his hand, pretending to be indifferent. "Forget it, it's okay. This church is not in the county town. Can't I just sit on the hillside and get some fresh air?" Sean ignored his companion's persuasion and walked out anyway. "After passing this hilltop, we will soon reach the county seat," Subai said to the people in the carriage while driving the carriage. "Can you still walk on your own?" I said, "Abai, you don't have eyes. We are all injured like this. We probably won't be able to walk in a few days. Monk and I are fine, but Gyatso is probably completely paralyzed." Subai nodded, but did not answer the fat man's words, but said directly to the monk, "Should we take a rest in this county or go directly to the demon cave?" The monk thought for a while and suggested, "Let's stop for a while. The dangers we encounter will not be avoided because we rush on the road quickly. In this regard, we must have confidence in the terrorist broadcast." We didn't waste much time before and went directly after arriving at Fulong Mountain. Although we were all seriously injured in the end, it still only took a few days of the 1-month period. So, we simply set aside some days to do the most basic recovery. Since we have arrived in the county, it is not far away from the demon cave. It's only less than a day's journey, so there's still time. Just as the monk analyzed in the car before, everyone picked up the baby from Fulong Mountain this time, and the final result was unimaginably weird. This weirdness may lead to a horror broadcast to change the plot. Regulation, for example, if this wave does not unfold as a matter of course, then the horror broadcast will probably arrange for another wave to come out. This can be regarded as a behavioral habit of the horror broadcast. As horror radio continues to play with its listeners for fun, smart listeners have also begun to figure out some of the habits of horror radio, or rather, its character. "It smells so good, Subai, what is it?" Fatty asked after sniffing his nose. "There is a group of beggars cooking in front. It looks like it's beggars' chicken." Subai looked over from a distance and saw that the beggars were indeed cooking beggars' chicken. After cleaning the chicken, they stuffed some fruits or dried meat into it. Then wrapped in lotus leaves and buried in a fire pit. This way of eating is the way of eating beggars' chicken in ancient times. However, in modern society, beggars' chicken has become a popular delicacy in many places. "Come here, Subai." The fat man was already greedy. "Come here, Monk Gyatso and Monk need to eat meat to replenish their bodies." Subai rolled his eyes at the fat man, clapped his hands, put the little guy in the carriage, and left it to the monk to take care of him temporarily. Then he touched the fake braid on his head and got out of the carriage. The fake pigtails were obtained by Lin Zhenying when Subai and others first went to catch zombies with Lin Zhenying. Monk and Gyatso didn't need them because they were monks, but Fatty and Subai needed to wear them to cover up. Otherwise there will be a lot of unnecessary trouble if you meet people from the government on the road. Subai planned to spend money to buy beggar's chicken, so he walked straight over, but at this moment, a Westerner walked towards him on the opposite side. The Westerner was wearing a priest's clothes, but they didn't fit well, and Subai didn't see him either. The priests who lived through this period were actually bald and had a ferocious face. How could such an image win the favor of the local people and enable them to preach? Xiao En, who was out for a stroll, also smelled the aroma and walked here with the same idea as Subai. When his eyes met with Subai's, both of them were stunned for a moment. Perhaps this was the sixth sense. They all felt an unusual aura from each other. "You are so powerful and confused." Today, Su went out without fortune-telling. He met such dirty foreigners on the road. It really stained Su's eyes. "It's really unfortunate for his family." "It's unfortunate for his family," Su said. Bai shook his head exaggeratedly as he spoke. "Ah, a poor scholar." Sean didn't quite understand what Subai said, but he could feel the obvious literary tone. His previous doubts were temporarily put behind him, and he got ahead of Sudbai. He walked towards the beggars. After walking a few more steps, Sean suddenly felt something was wrong. He immediately turned around and saw that the poor scholar was already behind him and smiling at him. A sharp dagger actually appeared in this short moment. He stabbed himself in the waist. WTF? Terror broadcast. Author, Chunji Disyao. Chapter 133. Sean's ruthlessness is a very arrogant ruthlessness, like a wolf, with a kind of pride of his own. Sudbai's ruthlessness seemed more feminine, and he carried out a belief that I would rather let the world down than the world would let me down. Perhaps before, when the two sides looked at each other in an unexpected moment, both sides' sixth senses actually had their own reactions, but after Sudbai's deliberate performance, Sean showed a kind of disdain, a kind of ant in the story world. The disdain of the natives. Sudbai, on the other hand, made up his mind to kill someone from the moment they met. Sudbai once met a Western audience in the story world, but that time, the level of the Western audience he met was actually not very high. Everyone seemed to be in the same boat, and the danger they faced was also huge, and there was no complete confrontation, but the two sides still divided into two camps with a tacit understanding. But in this story world, Sudbai, the fat man, the monk, and Gyatso have plotted against each other several times, and the trust between them is also lacking. If they met a Western audience, how could Sudbai still hold back? Although there may be no necessary conflict between the tasks of the two parties, and the goals may even be the same, Sudbai does not dare to gamble, and there is no need to gamble. Killing all gambling factors is equivalent to completely extinguishing the unstable factors. If it was an Eastern audience, Sudbai might hesitate. Since they were from the West and had a mentality that was not my kind, Sudbai would naturally kill them directly. The reason is actually that simple. In the story world, you don't need too many reasons to kill someone. Even if you don't like him, you can kill him. Bai Pai stabbed Xiao En's waist very easily. Sudbai's dagger was very tricky. He chose the angle and position very well, and it was a sneak attack, from Xiao Xiao's back. In a real duel, the first opportunity is often very important, and even the outcome of most duels depends on the advantage established by the first step. When the murder club was first organized, both Sunur, who was a military attaché, and Chu Zhao, who was in the police system, had systematically trained Sudbai on assassinations. In addition, Sudbai's parents did have a background in gangs, otherwise Sudbai's parents also have a bodyguard like Brother Ju, so Sudbai has been exposed to it since he was a child. Sudbai succeeded in this first move and immediately retreated. This is often the time when the opponent launches the most crazy counterattack. On the one hand, it is a kind of reverse stimulation when the body is traumatized. On the other hand, it is also the instinct of subconscious counterattack to protect oneself when one's emotions are suddenly overexposed. If you are sure that you can use the next move immediately after the first move to completely finish the opponent, then it is naturally the best. Otherwise, it is wisest and safer to take a step back first. Sudbai didn't know Sean's depth, so he couldn't guarantee that he could withstand the opponent's fierce counterattack. Ouch! After being attacked by a sneak attack, Sean fell into a rage and let out a wolf howl. Then he twisted his body, his skin turned green, his hands turned into wolf claws, and his face twisted into a wolf look. He has not fully transformed into a wolf, but this half-human wolf state can maximize human wisdom and wolf instinctive talents. The muscles in the waist began to tighten, and the wound in the waist was clamped, but the blood continued to flow out. Sean's eyes swept over the baby in Sudbai's hand, and he was shocked that the dagger in the hand of this Oriental man was so fierce that the sharp aura could continue to stagnate in his body after he pulled it out, making him unable to even heal his wounds. Werewolf, interesting. Sudbai held the dagger in one hand and made a fist with the other hand, and then began to bounce on the spot, like a boxer. In the distance, inside the carriage, The fat man opened the curtain and saw the scene over there. He couldn't help but swallowed and said, "Werewolves, the reinforcement system that Westerners like to play. There are actually Western audiences in this story world." Gyatso spoke slowly, "Nothing strange. Have you met other Eastern listeners before? It's not that we were lucky and just a few of us got together, but those listeners who were weaker than us may have been cleared away. Of course, a number of people should have died in the demon cave, but not all of them. The rest, yes, it should have been solved by Westerners. The three of us are all disabled now. If Abai does this, won't it cause trouble? Now we can't afford to offend him, can't we hide him?" The fat man said with some dissatisfaction. If he was still in good condition and his body was not injured, he would probably be more energetic than anyone else if he met a Westerner. But now that he is seriously injured, he really does not have the confidence to succeed. The monk looked at the fat man and said, "Didn't you say you wanted to eat the beggar's chicken? Didn't you cause the incident? This encounter must have happened by chance. It was also because Subai reacted quickly enough and struck hard enough that he is not completely passive now." The monk looked at the baby sitting in the car again, gestured to the baby and said, "Be good, drive the carriage away, let's stay far away, otherwise it will become a burden to Subai." The baby looked at the monk, and then climbed out of the curtain. At the front desk, a young hand held the reins, but it did not slap the whip or pull the reins. It just made a shelf, and then babble, "Baby, baby," shouted loudly. The horses actually moved, turned around, and started to drag the carriage farther away. "This kid, I have nothing to say. It would be great if my son was so smart," the fat man said with some envy. "It's a pity that he has to be sent to the demon cave, alas." The monk recited Amitabha but said nothing. Gyatso also said nothing. Because these two monks originally planned to devour the baby, but now it seems that the baby has been away from the mother's body for a long time, and the old man in the Fulong mountain painting should have done something. When the baby was born, all the spiritual energy he carried was absorbed by himself. Eating him was almost like eating a ginseng that was hundreds of years old. Although ginseng is precious, it can still be bought with money in the real world. It's unnecessary to eat him up and then completely offend Subai for this little benefit. You must know that Subai is in the best condition among the four of them now. Suddenly, the monk opened his eyes and said, "Child, stop, don't move." The child frowned at the person behind the curtain and stuck out his tongue, obviously dissatisfied with this changeable monk. "Monk, what's wrong?" the fat man asked. Gyatso began to tap his knuckles on the bottom of the carriage. "Over there, there are 3 auras, and they are already approaching. Then the Western guy's accomplices are here." The fat man was a little surprised. "Damn, it's over. We're not going to be killed in a wave." Abai picked one by one and succeeded in the sneak attack. "I don't think the problem is too big, but the 3 of us are like chickens now, and anyone who comes here can kill us. We have to find a way. The carriage is slow after all," the monk pondered. "Fat man, take that little bottle out of my arms," Gyatso said. His one arm was also broken. Although it was fixed, it would take several days to recover before it can be used. Now he can't even use it. He has no ability to hold anything, let alone fight. The fat man reached out and touched Gyatso's vagina and squeezed it. Gyatso's face darkened, on the left. "Oh, I didn't tell you earlier." The fat man took out a bottle, opened the cork and took a look. "Damn, isn't it an aphrodisiac? Is there any talisman water that stimulates medicinal effects?" "No, it is talisman water that stimulates people's breath and spirit." Gyatso looked at the fat man and asked. "Yes." The fat man took out a handful of talisman papers from his pocket. He had drawn a lot of talisman papers when he was poisoned by corpse poison. The effect was not great, but there were all kinds of miscellaneous ones. "Soak the talisman paper in water, add red pills, and the 3 of us drank together," Gyatso said. The monk heard this and nodded. The fat man was stunned for a moment. Damn, are you going to take strong aphrodisiac when death is imminent? Is this a shot before death? Or the three men in the carriage? Do as you say. The monk suddenly felt a headache. Sometimes this fat man was much smarter than 10,000 people, but sometimes he would easily go astray. You could tell by looking at his expression what was going on in his mind. The monk said this, and the fat man knew that he might have guessed wrong. He immediately took out the kettle, crushed the remaining red pills with his hands and threw them into the kettle. Then he lit the talisman paper and stuffed it into the kettle. After shaking for a few times, the fat man took a deep breath and said, "Drink." "Drink 1/3, Gyatso reminded. The fat man nodded and took 2 big sips. Then Emperor fed Gyatso several mouthfuls. Finally, the monk took the kettle and drank it all. Mikhail held a magic wand in his hand, and the power of the wind condensed a faint cyan halo around his body, making him faster than Peas and Ja behind him. Peas was holding a dark long bow. When he ran, his hair flowed, revealing his long pointed ears. Ja's body muscles began to bulge, and every step he took left a clear footprint. The 3 people were resting in a nearby church built in the suburbs. They rushed over after sensing Sean's wolf-like aura. However, at this moment, a carriage slowly drove over on the slope in front. The driver was actually a baby. Mikhail looked confused, but the 3 of them continued to move forward resolutely. Immediately afterwards, a wolf howl came out. This was not a werewolf's howl. A werewolf's howl was full of blood and violence, but this wolf howl carried a boundless vastness and extraordinary momentum. Mikhail took a deep breath. Peas and Ja looked at Mikhail, and continued running forward with him. Amitabha. The Buddha's name came out from the carriage, and the Sanskrit sound sounded, majestic and majestic, with a kind of mighty power of Buddhism. Mikhail's face finally became heavy, and his running speed finally slowed down. Behind him, Peas had stopped and began to draw his bow and arrow, and Ja was also beginning to prepare to strengthen his barbarian bloodline to the extreme. Infinite, Tianzun. Boom. In the sky, there was a faint roar of thunder. I don't know if it was a coincidence or just in time. Mikhail finally stopped and raised his hand to signal his partners behind him not to act rashly. In the carriage, the fat man had already started to have a nosebleed. Looking at his already hard lower body, he asked tremblingly. "Scared them, to stop."